And we're live. Friends from around the world, welcome to the great debate. Not a debate where both sides work to defeat one another, rather a debate where both sides work together to find common ground. Today, the world is more polarized than it's ever been. This is us doing our small part to change that. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe. We do debates every single Thursday. Next week, we have an awesome debate with Rudy Rahman and Malkon, an Israeli and a Palestinian, two awesome individuals. It's going to be a good one. Feel free to have a lively discussion in the comments, in the chat. Just keep it respectful. No hate. After this live discussion, which will be around an hour, we're going to have an after party in the Great Debate Discord. For those who are unfamiliar with Discord, it's an awesome messaging platform. We have great conversations there all the time. You can find a link to that in the description. And while you're at the description, you can also find links to our guests' social media pages as well as mine. Feel free to get in touch with any of us. Today, we have a very special debate. Two prominent Jewish activists who have vastly different worldviews, ideological rivals, arch nemeses of sorts. Without further ado, it's an honor to welcome my two guests. Let's just switch it up real quick. To my top left, Ariel Gold, a Middle East Analyst and the national co-director of the feminist anti-war group CODEPINK. Prior to being deported by Israel in 2018, she used to travel 1 to 2 times a year to the West Bank to live and work in the West Bank with Palestinians as a supporter of their nonviolent struggle for freedom. And to my top right, Hen Mazzig is an Israeli author, an international speaker, and a columnist for the Jewish Journal. His articles can be found in the LA Times, NBC News, the Jerusalem Post, and more. Hen and Ariel, it is a great honor to have you here today. We are going to begin by just better understanding who you are and your positions. Hen is a Zionist. Ariel is an anti-Zionist. Ariel, we'll start with you. Can you please explain what it means to be an anti-Zionist?
Well, before I do that, I just want to briefly say how complimented I am that somebody went through the effort to make bingo cards for both Hen and I. And really, I'm quite complimented, and I want to suggest, Hen, maybe we should try to do opposites. You know, try to get say all the things on your bingo.
I love it.
So I do identify as anti-Zionist. Zionism, as it was conceived and as it is carried out today, is predicated on removing or limiting the number of Palestinians from the land of Israel-Palestine. This is why the creation of the Jewish state involved the removal of over 750,000 indigenous people. Already a bingo thing on Hens. Going right for it. And that why today
Ariel, we seem to you froze for a minute. Was that just on my end? Hen, did she freeze for you?
Yeah, just for a second, but now.
Okay, but you're back. You're back. Sorry about that.
All right, I'm back. So that's why the Jewish state today relies on a careful manipulation of demographics, which denies citizenship to millions of people living under Israeli control, even around 375,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem who are in kind of a no man's land of residency rather than citizenship, even after it was annexed. So anti-Zionism opposes the necessity of privileging Jews in terms of demographics, in terms of rights, in terms of voting and citizenship, and instead envisions a Jewish world, envisions Jews, whether in Israel-Palestine or historic Palestine, however you refer to it, or in diaspora, to be able to live in full equality with equal rights with whoever we are living in the area with. Now, I could go further and just say that this isn't to say that I don't feel deeply personally connected to the land of Israel, Palestine, and to the people there. The first time I went to Israel, Palestine, which was not until I was an adult and already an activist for Palestinian rights, when I got off the airplane, I never felt so at home in my life. I wanted to stay and be with my people, and nothing ever felt so meaningful to me. And then I saw the occupation, and I have never felt so alienated and horrified. And this is the, as Peter Beinart's book once said, the crisis of Zionism, and why I call myself an anti-Zionist, and yet care very deeply about the Jewish people and the land of Israel, Palestine.
Thank you, Ariel. Hen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to join you. I want to say I'm disappointed that I don't see Ariel's pink earrings that I love, and I wonder if you're ever going to offer them for sale, because I'll get a pair. I love those earrings. But I want to say, we're talking about Zionism, and I think, a movement is not being defined by its critics, so I think it's important for Zionists to define what Zionism is, rather than anti-Zionists. And I want to read, I wrote down a quote by Sarah Yael Hirschhorn, an Israeli studies professor at Northwestern University. She said that Zionism is Jewish self-determination. It's co-signing that Israel should exist, that Jews have the right for self-determination, no more or no less than any other nationality. The Jews are not only religion, but we are also a people and a nation, that they have the right to have control over their own affairs, that their existence is not only predicated on being in a minority in some other countries. And it's important to define what Zionism is not. And Zionism is not opposition to Palestinian rights in any way, or a potential Palestinian state. Zionism is not support of every policy of Israel, or support of the current leadership of Israel, which I'm very critical of, as many people know from my writings and from my online activism and the things that I say. I'm very critical of the current Israeli government, and I'm pretty much opposing the current leadership. And Zionism is also not the belief that Jews should have more rights than any other minorities. Zionism is the belief that Jews deserve a safe haven, that the Jewish community, the Jewish people deserve this self-determination, that was the only way to protect ourselves from anti-Semitism. And if you look at history, that's really what it is. So you're a Zionist if you believe that Jewish people have the right for self-determination in their indigenous homeland, that you believe that there should be a Jewish country in the world, a democratic country, democratic Jewish country, and that you think that it should be a country that accepts Jews that feel in persecution. Like my family had to, I always say that anti-Zionism is a privilege ideology, and it's, clearly, evidently, it is an ideology that only privileged people can have. Mostly it's white privilege Westerners that are anti-Zionist, and it's because they have this. They don't need a country to escape to. And specifically, the Jewish anti-Zionists are the ones that are. They always see the ones that are vocal. You will see that it's normally not Jews of color. It's not Black Jews. It's a specific community that are privileged enough to have several other nationalities sometimes, and have the ability to be safe in other places. So in another country. So my family was not as privileged.
So I want to begin by saying we're not necessarily safe. I don't think Jews are right now safe in the United States. I also don't think that Jews are safe in the current state of Israel, but that it's about working with those who we live among, and working within each country to make each country a safe place for all people. And through being a safe place for all people, that's how we keep ourselves safe as Jews. But I have to ask, how you, because one of my issues, and I don't see liberal Zionists as the enemy or necessarily as problematic. Many liberal Zionist groups, Peace Now in Israel, as well as in the US, J Street here in the US, do incredible work to oppose annexation, to watch and oppose settlement. But it is the use of Zionism to excuse apartheid, which is the problem. And I have to ask you, especially, as we move closer and closer to a one-state reality, or as we're already in a one-state reality, I would say, in Israel-Palestine, how you think it is possible to have a Jewish state without manipulating demographics, denying citizenship, ensuring a Jewish majority. Because, in a fantasy world, like I said, the first time I stepped foot in the state of Israel, I was, I'm home. This feels like home. I want to be with my people. So, I'm not opposed to this fantasy on if we establish a community on Mars. Personally, I like diversity, but, theoretically, but that's not reality where we are. Reality is 5 million people between the river and the sea who are denied their basic rights, and how you would see, I want to try to understand, Hen, how you would see granting those rights, giving Palestinians rights while still being able to maintain a Jewish state. Because I would say that the concepts of equality in a Jewish state don't work together.
I just want to touch first on your initial point that you don't feel safe in the United States. An important point, because if that's what Jewish people, and I hear a lot of Jewish people that are saying it, that they're not feeling safe in the United States. It's an important thing to discuss, but I want you to remember that you're not the only Jewish community in the world. And you are, while you are a very important community, the Jews of Yemen, or the Jews in Iran, or Jews in France, or Jews all over the world. I mean, my family that were ethnically cleansed from Iraq for being Jewish, or from Tunisia, my father, where he came from North Africa. Jews in Africa, in Ethiopia, the Falashmora that are, by the way, on Monday, they're going to approve a resolution to bring to Israel 2,000 Falashmora Jewish, Ethiopian Jews, part of Beta Israel, Black Jews that otherwise, that by the way, America doesn't really care about them. And as you said, you don't feel safe in America, but right. But so who will care for them? Who will care for these people that are, CODEPINK is not arranging a protest for Jews of color in the Middle East and in North Africa. I haven't seen you taking any actions. Not you. I mean, the CODEPINK is in general, and left-wing anti-Israel, anti-Zionist groups are not speaking about this community. And today, the largest community of Jews of color is in Israel. And if maybe in America Jews can make it work, but in other places Jews are not as privileged as you are to have even the discussion and to go and protest your government. You don't understand this privilege that my family never had. They had no political power and no representation. My great-grandfather was executed for being a Zionist spy. My family lost everything they had. They lost their land, they lost their property. And it's not just them, it's them and 850,000 Jewish refugees from throughout the Middle East and North Africa that you never spoke up for. And you never demanded that we will get back the $300 billion in property that was stolen from us from Arab and Muslim countries. You never spoke up about the 5 times the size of the land of Israel that was stolen from us. I hate comparing the two, because I think that there must be a just solution for the Palestinian refugees. We have to find a way to come to an agreement between Israel and other countries in the region to find a solution for the refugee problems. But for this refugee problem that is absolutely should be solved. But 850,000 Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa, Jews that have been in the Middle East for decades, that were oppressed by the Arab Empire, that were not Arabs. We were never treated as Arabs. We never had the privilege of being an Arab in an empire, in pan-Arabist empire. And we are, and we are today the majority of Jews in Israel. We are the ones that are voting for the government that you're seeing. Not me personally, I oppose the government, but they are the ones that are voting for that. And I think a lot of it comes from the trauma that my family experienced in those countries, and it's a trauma that you will never be able to understand. I don't know where your family came to America.
Poland. Yeah. Vast numbers of us died in the Holocaust, so totally, I get trauma, but we're not talking about Jewish trauma, and I totally agree with you on, of course, Jews in every country, but specifically in the Middle East and North Africa, have experienced horrific repression throughout the years, massacres pretty much everywhere. But we're talking about right here today in Israel, Palestine, and the denial of rights to 5 million indigenous people. And you know, there are separate issues, and I just want to clarify briefly, because you said CODEPINK doesn't speak out for Jewish refugees, et cetera, in Yemen. CODEPINK, as an organization, our mission is to work on U.S. foreign policy, and so we focus specifically on the involvement of the U.S. government. So not to say that I personally don't care very much, and I think you know that I've written about, and Jews in Iran, and so on.
The American government to take in Jewish refugees from the Middle East and Africa?
No, we focus on U.S. foreign policy and militarism. I was just letting you know our mission.
Foreign policy, though.
So
if I may,
a lack of concern for. We also don't focus on domestic policy.
Friends, I'd like to chime in. You know, it actually seems like the difference between you is not as great as I initially thought. I think Twitter is just a nasty place and makes everything seem worse than it actually is. Ariel, you mentioned the aspects of Zionism that you have issue with. But those aspects of Zionism, it doesn't seem like they need to be inherently tied into Zionism. It seems like that there's a brand of Zionism, as you mentioned, liberal Zionism, that does not include things like demographic control and oppression of another group of people. Is there a brand of Zionism? And I do realize there's issue with the term, because in the United States, in circles that you are connected with, Zionism is considered akin to racism, white supremacy, Nazism even. So I do understand your reservation to accept a term as Zionism because it's such a trigger word to many in left-wing circles in the United States. But is there a brand of Zionism, and maybe we could even rebrand it, right, that you can get behind?
Well, I think Peter Beinart, and that's his take. It's not my take personally, but I think Peter Beinart, in his breakout New York Times piece where he came out for a one-state solution this year, did rebrand it for himself, because that's what works for him. For me, I don't think it's possible to have a Jewish state without denying equal rights or maintaining demographic control. Again, denying citizenship, denying rights. So I don't think it's a possibility. That said, there are many liberal Zionists whose work I work closely with and agree very much with. I have to ask Hen a question here, because he's said a number of times that you oppose the current Israeli government, as I do too. And I'll check off another square on your bingo card, which is that, what was it? We agree on hating Bibi. But you published an article recently this year, I believe it was in March of 2020, celebrating Gilon Erdad being, who is the one who deported me in 2018, celebrating him being appointed to be the Israel's ambassador to both the UN and the US. And I have to say it surprised me a bit, because I do know you to be critical of the current Israeli administration, which Erdogan is a vital part of. He's really a right-hand man to Netanyahu, and quite the opposite of liberal principles first of all, I would bring it back to, because you and I are both incredibly concerned with anti-Semitism, that in 2007, when he was a member of Knesset, Erdogan called for Israel to strengthen its ties with evangelicals and boasted about working with evangelicals, and still this year was a speaker at the Christians United for Israel conference. And for anybody who's not aware, Christians United for Israel, their founder and chairman is John Hagee, who coincidentally has coronavirus now. John Hagee has said such things as referring to Hitler as a hunter sent by God to expedite God's will of establishing a modern-day Jewish state, and accused Jews ourselves of causing the Holocaust through disobedience to God. So this is a connection that Erdogan is proud to have. He and Ayla Shaked also came up with the Facebook law, enabling Israel to have both Facebook and Google remove content that they deem to be against Israel's interests. He ordered the cameras to be installed at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Thankfully, and he's a big fan of annexation, calling in 2018, because Trump was president, for Israel to use this opportunity to, I think he quoted, to express our biblical right to the land. So I just want to ask, I read that article of yours as I was preparing for this debate, and it surprised me, and I find it, Erdogan to be anything but progressive and liberal.
Well, I'll disagree with you, because I know Gilad Erdan personally. I mean, you failed to mention that he was the first minister of police to appoint a Muslim general to the police, the highest ranking policeman in the history of the Israeli police. Was appointed by Erdan. Jamal Khalkhush is the general that Gilad Erdan appointed. He also believes in integrating the Arab community into Israeli official bodies, and he's advocating against honor murdering honor killing in Muslim communities in Israel. Is a very, I think in his opinions, is very progressive, and we can. I mean, I disagree completely with the evangelical Christian part, but that's just my opinion. And if we are going to judge a movement by who supports it, so we can absolutely speak about anti-Zionists and which type of Americans are siding with you and with anti-Zionists like you. We can speak about why Dr. David Duke, the Grand Wizard of the KKK, continuously supporting and applauding to people. I don't like to speak. I don't want to name names, and I don't want to, because I think it's below. But the point is that the KKK are anti-Zionists. That white supremacists, Nazis, violent Nazis that are neo-Nazis that are committing crimes and anti-Semitic attacks against Jews are anti-Zionists. They celebrate anti-Zionists. They celebrate opinions of people that are in the circle of anti-Zionist Jews in America. And they went so far as white supremacists went so far as supporting Ilhan Omar because she made anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist statements. So if neo-Nazis can look beyond beyond their white supremacy ideology to support anti-Zionists, I think there's a real problem there. But I'm not the one to define your movement. But I just think that, you mentioned J Street, you mentioned liberal Jewish organizations that are Zionists. I think that the problem is by the way that you define Zionism. And I think that Zionism is not a blind support in the Israeli government. And while as I said, I'm very critical of the current Israeli government and the leader, and I'm hoping to change it as I'm campaigning and working in every election. But I think that if you want to really define Zionism for what it is, Zionism is the belief, as I said in the beginning, the belief that the Jewish people have the right for self-determination. And you also mentioned, that's an important point. You mentioned indigenous people in the Middle East. So are we in an agreement that Jews are indigenous to this area or not?
Some Jews. I agree that you're indigenous to the area, and I think that's a more complex question, but many Jews, absolutely.
So
and I think we also agree that upon the founding, and I know you've written extensively about this, that Israel treated the indigenous Jews of the area, Mizrahi Jews, horrifically.
So only Mizrahi Jews are indigenous to the land?
No, I didn't say that. I said I think we're in agreement that even Israel, and I know you write extensively about the mistreatment of Mizrahi Jews in Israel from its founding.
Okay, but which Jews
today.
are not indigenous to Israel?
That's a nuanced question, so it would have to be very much broken down. It's a much more detailed thing. Well, I don't think that's really what we're here to discuss.
Are you indigenous to
Zionism?
Israel? Are you indigenous? But of course, but Zionism is defined by indigenous.
I myself am not, but many Jews are indigenous to Israel, and that's but certainly not Jews coming
Where are you indigenous
from
to?
America. I come from Spain, actually, in the 1400s. I have ties
So
back to there.
before that, the Sephardi Jews in Spain, you saying that they're indigenous to Spain only, and they didn't came from anywhere else? Well, I mean, how far
if we're
back
going to go into detail about, if we're going to go into detail about that, we could also go into detail of the Middle Ages and when there were an enormous amount of conversions of Jews and so on. So that's
wait, so Judaism started in Spain?
Wait.
So that's why I say that there is more complexity to that question, but I think we can be in agreement that there are Jews who are indigenous to Israel.
I mean,
and there's Palestinians, and I think the real issue here is that Palestinians are, without question, indigenous to Israel-Palestine, and yet live there without their basic rights.
Let me chime in real quick, because the conversation on indigeneity is very interesting, and we could dedicate a full few hours to that. And I am happy to get back there. But
I'm sorry, it's crucial for this conversation. This is an
indigenous. I'm okay with having the conversation of indigeneity, but I feel like we were getting someplace and we got off track. I am happy to circle back, but it seems like Ariel's biggest issue with Zionism, or today with liberal Zionism, is she just does not think that there's a way for us to have a Jewish state that is also democratic. Hen, do you see a way for that to happen?
For Palestine, of course. I mean, every leader of Israel since the Oslo Accords, even before that, supported and promoted a two-state solution. The only ones that have been rejecting a two-state solution were the Palestinian Authority leadership that is corrupt and stayed in power for 12 years, over 12 years, and haven't been elected, and the Hamas organization, terrorist organization in Gaza that is controlling Gaza, and anti-Zionists in America. Those are the people that are opposing a two-state solution. Sorry. There's also other side, the far right, that wants a one-state solution, which I personally disagree with. I don't think it should be a one-state. I think the Palestinian community deserves national rights just as much as we do. I don't think we can advocate for Zionism and national rights for the Jewish people if we're not advocating for the Palestinians as well. And yeah.
Can you get behind that, Ariel?
I have a few questions here. So you say that the only ones opposing a two-state solution are the PA, Hamas, anti-Zionist Jews in America. First of all, I'm no fan of the terrorist organization Hamas, and I'm incredibly critical and no fan of the PA. And I think they are doing, they're really, first of all, repressing their own people and working against any solution. There's no vision coming out from them. But that said, how about 650,000 settlers, many of whom are not zealous right-wing? I think that is what got in the way of a two-state solution, and that is what is pursuing a one-state solution. And we have to look at power here. So again, I'm no fan of the PA, and they're doing nothing helpful right now. But it's Israel who has the ability to build settlements, to reduce the barriers to living in those settlements so that low-income people, to build roads into the settlements, to subsidize the settlements. And that is what is actually pursuing a one-state solution. It's daily de facto annexation that cemented a one-state solution. I think a two-state solution, and I was a fan a long time ago before it got buried under so many mountains of settlements. And also, I want to get back to who else is getting in the way of a two-state solution. How about your good friend, Gilad Erdan, who speaks out as a proponent of de jure annexation and is supportive of the settlements, as a member of Likud, is part of that right wing?
Well, I'm not Gilad Erdan. I'm Hen Mazzig, and I'm not going to defend him or any other politicians. I wrote an article supporting his appointment because I really believed in a lot of his progressive ideologies, but I don't want to spend time speaking about this because I don't think it's relevant. I think what's relevant is the definition of indigeneity to the area, because I think that's the core of the debate. If people do not, if people want to say, well, Ashkenazi Jews are not indigenous to this area, or Sephardic Jews are not indigenous to this area? What stopped them from saying that Mizrahi Jews are not indigenous to the area? Who are we to define? I mean, how long back time are we going to go to define?
Let's just start with the past 100 years. Let's just begin there. And let's begin with the reality that Palestinians are undoubtedly indigenous. And I think the question here is not about the denial of rights to indigenous Jews who have citizenship and rights, but the denial of rights to the indigenous Palestinian population that's happening today.
When does indigenous rights expire, Ariel?
Let's talk about the indigenous rights of the Palestinians. What rights do you think indigenous Palestinians should have, and what are you doing to help guarantee those rights?
As I said before, I believe that the Palestinians have a right for self-determination, and it's a two-state solution that I support. The point is that I think that it's very easy for you, especially because you live on a stolen land of an indigenous native tribe, and you never recognize that. And
I recognize that all the time, Hen. All the time.
I'm sorry.
All the time.
It's not only the ground; it's the burial grounds of the Iroquois.
Absolutely.
And I think
actually, I live on Onondaga land.
So
many indigenous tribes here in the U.S.
And the problem that I have with someone like you that is living on the stolen land of Native Americans, making an argument specifically on burial ground. I mean, I cannot even imagine how horrible it is I have Native Americans friends in America tell me how horrible it is, but I can't really connect to this like whole feeling knowing that someone like you lives on their ground, and we're spending, we spent a few minutes here talking to me about settlements and how settlements are a problem while you are a settler.
These are not exactly the same things. And certainly as an American, I'm part of the struggle for indigenous rights, and I at no point am suggesting that Jews living in Israel Palestine should have to leave. There's no suggestion that you shouldn't have to be there. But a settlement is a very specific definition.
Guys, please don't speak. Friends, hold on. Hold on. Guys, the software cannot pick up on more than one audio stream at a time, so please do not speak over each other. Take turns. We've done an awesome job until now, and we'll continue to do it. So, Ariel, please finish your point, and then, Hen, the floor is yours.
I want to point out that a settlement is a very specific definition by the UN. It's on land that is recognized as disputed territory. It's a violation of international law. The more accurate comparison that you might be trying to make would be Israelis living in Tel Aviv or Haifa to Americans living on stolen land built on racism and ethnic cleansing. Absolutely. That's, America. We have many problems here, and that's much of the root of them. But do you agree that settlements are a violation of international law? Israeli settlements.
Yeah, I agree in general that your settlement is also a violation of international law, and I do oppose the settlements. I think that the settlements are not helping achieve peace and a two-state solution, and I support ending the occupation as well. But I'm also supporting ending the occupation of you. Like the issue is that where you live right now, as a settler, as a colonial settler, on a stolen ground and a burial ground of Native Americans that you have killed all of them. You haven't left any of them to fight back. And you have the temerity to say that you care about the Palestinian community, that they are more indigenous. I mean, the Native Americans have been there so long, and they had a community that was fruitful and lively. Tel Aviv was a desert. I mean, most of Israel was a desert. The notion that you care about the Palestinians while you live on a stolen land is really problematic for me, and I think that it's beyond hypocritical. And if we want to speak about justice, this would be the place to start for you to move out of Ithaca, out of the stolen land, and where you are indigenous to, which I guess is Spain.
First of all, I don't think we're here to debate the denial of rights to the indigenous populations of North America, which we could debate, but that's not what we're here to debate. And actually, I don't think we could debate, because I would imagine we're actually in quite a lot of agreement about that, about racial injustice here in America, about denial of indigenous rights. But we're here to talk about Zionism, about what's happening right now on the ground in Palestine and Israel, in your country, in the Jewish state. So a state that is important to both of us. Yes, I think we do agree that we came on here today to talk about your country, correct?
But you understand my point, that I think that you are distracting, and I think anti-Zionism at large is the distraction of human rights violations in white countries.
You're doing the whataboutism right now.
How am
what
I?
about what America did? We're not talking about what America did. America is committing crimes against humanity daily.
I also,
we're here to talk about what Israel is doing. So let's not do whataboutism. Let's not do, well, this country's doing worse or this country did that. Let's talk about what Israel is doing. Let's talk about the denial of rights to Palestinians here today. We also didn't come on to debate about me or about me in the United States. We came on to talk about Zionism, to talk about Israel, to talk about de facto annexation that's going on daily, to talk about Palestinians living under a brutal military occupation.
I also think that it's fair to point out that currently there is, to some extent, a Native American struggle, although Native Americans do have full and equal rights in the United States. But the struggle that they do have, it seems like that's not something that,
Right.
Again?
They don't have representation in Congress.
No, right, that's true.
That's actually not how U.S. Congress works that way, though.
Well, that's true. They would need to be elected, but, and Ariel, I don't know you so well, but you do seem like the type of person who would speak out against any form of injustice towards Native Americans. And you're not asking Jews to leave Israel. So
no.
I personally don't see you as being inconsistent or hypocritical in the sense you're focusing on injustices today. You happen to have a major focus on Israel. And I could understand why people living here would be perhaps triggered by that, because you're all the way across the world complaining about another country when there's problems going on in your own home. As you mentioned, it is a form of whataboutism. It is legitimate to talk about other people's struggles. I did just want to put some clarity here, because I don't think you're being a hypocrite. I think you do have a right to speak on this issue.
I didn't say that she doesn't have a right to speak. I just pointed out the hypocrisy. And I think that it's, you know, if you look at the Israeli parliament and the representation of Israeli Arabs, Palestinians in the Israeli government, or in Israeli public life, there are more Israeli Palestinians in Israeli academia, Israeli Arabs in Israeli academia than there are Mizrahim. There are more Israeli Arabs that are in academia than there are Mizrahim. Do you understand that this figure, how mad it is? How many? And the point is that there aren't any Native Americans in your Congress. And
actually, there is. But again, there are Deb Haaland, who was elected in 2018.
We're getting off topic because
But again, off topic. We agree. There should be more Native Americans.
We have a consensus. We have a consensus here. Friends, we have a consensus.
On domestic issues here at home, and as you know, Hen, I don't single out Israel. You actually inspired one of my campaigns around the boycott of Saudi Arabia, asking Lush Cosmetics to close their stores in Saudi Arabia. It was you tweeting about Lush being there that inspired the campaign, and then I built the campaign, and you lifted it up on social media again. So this isn't a question of whether or not I single out Israel. I do work extensively on Israel because as a Jew, it's important to me. I have family there, like I said, the land, the people, these are my people. This is important to me. But we're not here to talk about what's happening to indigenous rights here in the United States. We're here to talk about what's happening in Israel and the denial of rights to Palestinians. And we're also not here to talk about the repression of Mizrahi Jews in Israel, which we again agree on. Should there be more Mizrahi Jews in academia there? Are there not enough opportunities because of racism? Absolutely. I'm behind you on that. If there's ways I can support you in that work that you do, I'm down to support you. But we're right now talking about the suffering and the oppression of Palestinians.
Why? Why is it about Palestinians? I'm trying to understand. Why is it not
that
about...
was the topic of this debate, was Zionism. The topic of this debate was not the repression of Mizrahi Jews in Israel. We could have a different topic, discussion on that. I'm not an expert, but I'd be happy to discuss. But that's
right.
why
But
we're
you're an
here.
expert about Palestinians. Zionism is about Jews and Palestinians. It's about the whole community that is living there in this land. It's about Jewish refugees. It's about my family. It's about indigenous rights. It's about all these issues that I understand that you feel very uncomfortable discussing. But if Israel doesn't exist, where is my family going? Where will Mizrahi community go? And I think that before we even talk about racism, I care about where my family will live, where the majority, 55% of Israeli Jews, what will be their future? Would you condone a genocide of my community? Because if Israel won't exist, that's what will happen to us. And that's what happened to us in the Arab world. That's what happened in North Africa.
Let's stay here today. Absolutely, that happened. Jews have been massacred everywhere. But establishing a state that privileges one group over the other, that denies citizenship, that sets up checkpoints and roadblocks and builds settlements and imprisons children, that is not the solution for safety. And the way that we achieve safety as Jews, as I've said before, I don't think there's many places that Jews are safe right now. And I agree, it's not just in the US that we're seeing rises of anti-Semitism. We're seeing rises of anti-Semitism across Europe, specifically in France. But it's about defeating fascism, which is an issue that we're dealing with right here in the US, and you're dealing with as well. It's about defeating fascism and building a society in Israel, Palestine, building a society in France, building a society in the United States, in Brazil, where they're watching a rise of fascism, where all people are safe. And that is the work in front of us that we need to do. And in order to do that work, we have to support equality and freedom for all people, not just for Jews.
Ariel, let me ask you one question. What will happen to this 2,000 Black Jews in Ethiopia that are being harassed and oppressed by the government and by Christian leaders in this place and don't feel safe and are begging to make Aliyah to Israel? What is your solution for them? It's either that or death. Where do you...
I'm not opposing them coming to Israel. What I'm opposing is the denial of citizenship to Palestinians. That's what I'm opposing. I'm opposing the ethnic cleansing. I'm opposing the ongoing Nakba, daily annexation, the ongoing oppression of Palestinians. I'm not opposed to Jews being safe in Israel. I'm not opposed to Ethiopian Jews coming to Israel. I am opposed to denying citizenship. So along these lines, would you support giving full citizenship to at least all Palestinians in East Jerusalem? And then we can say the larger question, would you support full citizenship for Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza? So that's the question here. Not whether Ethiopian Jews should be able to come and have safety and seek refuge. I'm for refugees being able to get out, period. I'm for African refugees who are not Jewish being able to have safe harbor and citizenship in Israel. But the question here is, are you for citizenship for full voting rights for Palestinians in Israel, Palestine?
Yeah, I absolutely support Palestinian refugees receiving citizenship in Palestine. I support Palestinian refugees receiving citizenship in Lebanon. Hundreds of thousands of them that are still living under real apartheid. They don't have access to schools. They don't have access to the same institutions that Lebanese people have access to. I support the Palestinians in Jordan receiving citizenship as well in Jordan and being equal citizens. But
not being able to come back to Palestine and have citizenship there, if that's their preference?
No, I support a Palestinian state. That's what I said. I support their own state.
So you don't support Palestinians currently living in Israel, Palestine, in the state that there is right now. The state that there is right now, do you support full equal rights, including full voting rights for everybody right now living in Israel, Palestine?
Over 1.8 million Israelis, Israeli Palestinians, Israeli Arabs have this already in Israel.
I didn't ask about the 20% of Israel's population. I said before,
I understand what you're trying to do. Ariel, I understand what you're trying to do.
Careful control of demographics. You're just making the initial point about demographics.
It's not control over demographic. Don't say that, because 55% of Israeli Jews are Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. So you're basically saying that we're not real people? You're saying that we're not really from the Middle East and North Africa?
It's denying control of demographics of non-Jews. So still, you do not support. What about just the Palestinians in East Jerusalem? who have
So-
residency for an area that's been annexed, that was annexed in 1980, do you support them having the right to vote in national rather than only municipal elections?
I support a Palestinian state. I support their national rights in a Palestinian state that will be agreed by both sides if one day they will get to an agreement. And you know what? I'll get to an agreement.
So in the meantime, you support apartheid. But what about in the meantime? What if we strive for that? What if we strive for that? That's what you just said. You support whenever that happens. But we're here right now. Right now, 5 million Palestinians do not have the right to vote regarding the country, the government that rules over them. So right now, it's apartheid. And right now, Palestinians should have the voting rights.
Can I answer that? Because you just called Israel apartheid, and I think you're minimizing the evils of apartheid, and it's very important to point this out. And I let you speak, so let me finish. But in Israel, there's no apartheid. Nothing that even come close to what happened in 1998 in the Rome status that was under apartheid. In South Africa, public vehicles, hospitals, even sidewalks were segregated by race. Sex was outlawed between white and black people, and biracial children were born as a crime. In Israel, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze all drive the same public transport, eat in the same restaurants, live in the same city. We are literally on top of each other. The Dome of the Rock, one of the most holiest places for Muslims, is being controlled by Muslims within Israel. Arab citizens of Israel enjoy full range and political rights. I wrote this all down because it's so important for me, because there is discrimination. Don't get me wrong, there's discrimination in Israel just like there is in any society. But to compare it to apartheid, you're doing such disservice and insulting the memory of people that actually fought racial segregation. And what is this idea of racial segregation within Israel? Do you think me, as an Iraqi Tunisian, that my mom speaks Arabic and my dad speaks Tamazight Tunisian Arabic, you think I am different than the people of this area? Is that what you really think? You're telling me that I'm fake? Does that sound right to you? Because if there is racism, it has to be, I have to identify people that are from the same area that I live in, but differently. So what makes me superior to them?
What makes you, absolutely, I don't think you're different. And I think that you should have full rights. The question is why in the West Bank there are two different sets of laws for two different groups of people. The question is why, if it's not apartheid, actually, it's been defined as apartheid. But if it isn't apartheid, then how come an Israeli settler living in the West Bank is under civilian law, while a Palestinian indigenous person to the land is subject to military law with entirely different set of punishments? Why two sets of laws? So actually, I am talking about apartheid. I'm not saying that it is apartheid inside the green line of Israel. That is discrimination, as you said. Some pretty severe discrimination. But
you just said
the West Bank, apartheid.
Right? Mizrahi Jews, you agree that Mizrahi Jews are indigenous, at least that. I think all Jews are indigenous. But okay, even if I take your point that only Mizrahi Jews are indigenous, which means 55% of Israeli Jews, how can I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? That we are...
Okay. First of all, we're not going to go back into the indigenous conversation.
No, but you're bringing it up all the time.
How come Mizrahi Jews get the right to vote and Palestinians living in the West Bank do not? Or we could go back to East Jerusalem, Palestinians living in East Jerusalem.
So some thoughts on the issue of apartheid. It seems like this is more of a semantic argument. For it to be officially an apartheid, it needs to be citizens with different sets of rules for each group of citizens. And because Palestinians aren't citizens, technically it's not an apartheid. That being said, it seems awfully similar because you do have a population living on the land that does not have the same right as what I have and what Hen has, and it is awfully similar. I think many Israelis are triggered by the word, which might mean that maybe there's a better approach to explain the injustice that occurs, because it seems like apartheid's a trigger word, conversation's over. Let's just focus on the fact that Palestinians aren't equal without getting into the semantic argument of what apartheid means, and see how we could create a reality where Palestinians get that equality. Hen has a solution. It's a two-state solution. Ariel, your solution, because you don't think a two-state solution is viable, is a one-state binational state, correct? You just want one state for everybody, equal rights across the board?
I want any solution that guarantees equality freedom, and dignity for all people living in the area. And Hen's is built on a future that doesn't exist. And I'm talking about right here, right now. I'm talking about the denial of rights today and the necessity for full equality, for full freedom, for all people living on the land today, all people who are living under Israeli control.
In all fairness, while I think there's a lot we can do today to make the situation better for Palestinians, can you understand why Israelis, given their very difficult history, not only on this land, but before this land, and then after returning to this land, facing constant terror attacks, why they wouldn't be comfortable with giving a population that often, now again, not the entire population, but many of a population expressing the fact that they want to see Israel cease to exist. Can you understand why many Israelis would be uncomfortable with Palestinians having the right to vote, where they could potentially vote in a leader or leadership that will then end Israel? Can you understand why there's a tension there and struggle against that idea?
I understand. Absolutely. I understand that it's scary and that it's terrifying for many Israeli Jews, for many Jews across the world. And yet I think the principles of equality and justice and democracy have to override that. And we have to push through that fear to work towards full equality for all people, to work towards those Jewish values that I raise my children with, and Jews around the world believe and have for so many generations, have believed long before the establishment of the State of Israel, are what nourish and define us.
Can I just reply to that? I think, the problem is that you are advocating for an ethno-state, a Palestinian ethno-state that will have a majority of Palestinians. And you're telling me, a Mizrahi guy, just like the 55% of Israeli Jews that are descendants of first generation or second generation of Jews that were forced out from the Middle East and North Africa and from Iran because of empires, because of the Arab Empire and because of the Iranian Empire, that has oppressed us, put us as second-class citizens, as dhimmis. We lost our lives, we lost our family members, we lost our land, and we lost our property. And you telling me now, I want to create another Arab state. I want to create a Palestinian state that you will live as a minority in. And Hen, trust me, it will be okay. Don't worry, because this time it's going to be different. This time, everything that you experience in 12 countries, the refugees that came from those lands, it's going to be okay. And you know what? I don't care what will happen to Ethiopian Jews. Let's just uphold great ideas of value, of social justice. But I think that what you're saying, and I'm not here to debate the policies, we're here to debate Zionism. And I think that Zionism, what it means essentially is that it's one place for Jewish refugees, not only refugees, but Jews from all over the world to come back to their indigenous homeland, where they came from. And leave us free people and leave us protected people. Because today, when anti-Semitism, I won't speak about the US because you know better than me what's the situation with anti-Semitism in America. But in France, when 9 out of 10 students, Jewish students, are experiencing anti-Semitism, or in Ethiopia, like I said before, or the 15,000 Iranian people that are left in Iran out of 150,000 that were oppressed. I mean, 10% are still unsafe, and Jews from all over the world are still feeling danger for their lives. There's one place for them. It's not for Jews. It's not only for Jews from America. And I think that the problem is that you don't offer solution for them. What you're saying is that you're comfortable and you feel like you're safe, so you can preach to Jews of color, to the largest community of Jews of color in the world, the largest community of Jews of color in the world, in Israel. You feel like we need to listen to you and what you and the ideas and the imperial ideas that you have for us and for our future, with the trauma that we brought with us from the Arab countries that we came from.
I hear that you have trauma. European Jews have trauma as well, from the Holocaust and many other things. And I do not think Jews are safe right now in America. I don't think any Americans are safe right now in America, but especially Americans of color and American minorities, including Jews. Again, in terms of Iran, Jews are not the only unsafe people in Iran right now. That's an incredibly repressive situation with many political prisoners. But I want to get back to something that you said a moment ago. You said that if we give all people rights, if there's an Arab majority, if we don't control the demographics of the state of Israel, that it will be an Arab ethnocracy?
Do you oppose the Iran right to exist? Are you anti-Iran?
Say again?
Because of the human rights violations of Iran that you mentioned, are you anti-Iran? Do you think that Iran has the right to exist? Is it
I'm not anti any country. I'm for
I-
equality and freedom and justice for any country. Am I a fan of the Iranian government? God, no. But we're here to talk about the Israeli government, and we're here to talk about whether it's possible to have a Jewish state that, without maintaining demographics, without manufacturing and ensuring Jewish majority demographics, and whether that's an ethical state if it denies citizenship and other rights to 5 million people.
Arab are citizens and full equal citizens in Israel. Jews in Iran are not equal citizens in Iran. No, because you
are equal citizens. There's an enormous amount of discrimination. They actually have
out of 150,000 that were ethnically cleansed. You want to tell me that they're equal citizens? You're tokenizing them, Ariel.
We're not here to talk about Iran, but Jews in Iran do have the right to vote. Now, Palestinians under Israeli control do not, and that's what we're here to talk about.
1.8 million Israeli Arabs vote. In Gaza, they had right to vote. To them, would have voted. And the same thing in the West Bank. In the West Bank, you have Palestinian government that is being supported by
under Israeli control. The Palestinian Authority is not who is in charge of the West Bank. I'm no fan of the Palestinian Authority either, but there is Israeli military law in the West Bank administered by the Israeli government that Palestinians there live under and yet have no right to vote for that government.
Under Palestinian law in Area A and B, which is under Palestinian civil law. In Area C, you have maybe a few thousands of Palestinians that Israel is making sure that they will be able to live.
Does the army not come into Area A or B? You've been in the military. Are you trying to tell me that the Israeli military does not have actual control?
Palestinian security forces and the Israeli army have a coordination system, and every time the Israeli army wants to enter Area A, it's being done in coordination with the Palestinian security forces. That I work with them very closely. We don't want to debate Israeli policy because that's not the point of the debate. The debate is what anti-Zionism against Zionism. What is this ideology that you and maybe 5% or not more than 10% of Jews around the world share, and why you a minority within our community? Why Jews all over the world understand that they need a country, that they need a policy, a safety policy. When things go terribly wrong in Ethiopia, when Black Jews don't have anywhere else to escape, and instead of telling me, you don't even have an answer for them. What you're telling me is that, I'm not opposing them. I'm just against Israel, but you don't care about their lives, and that's the problem. Once you care about the lives of Jews of color and Black Jews, and instead of just shouting Black Lives Matter, you would actually do something to save Black lives, like Jewish Black lives from Ethiopia. That this Monday, Israel is going to vote on bringing them to Israel and paying 270 million shekels to bring them, and it does nothing to help them.
I'm sorry to inform you, but while I am Jewish, and so my community is particularly meaningful to me, I do not think that Jewish lives, that Black Jewish lives, that Indigenous Jewish lives, that any Jewish lives are any more valuable than Palestinian lives or than the lives of anybody across this world.
But you care about Palestinians more than you care about Black Jews. That's what I'm trying to say, Ariel. When did you spoke about the Falashmorek tribe? When have you spoke about Mizrahim?
Let's not do the whataboutism. We're talking about Zionism. We're talking about demographic control of a population. We are talking about denial of citizenship. We are not doing why won't you condemn this? Why won't you support that?
We're talking about racism, and we're talking about racism towards Jews of color. Your own community. You just said, I'm part of this community, right? So why don't you care about them? That's what I'm trying to ask. And that's what Zionism is about, caring to them. Why doesn't CODEPINK ever do a campaign for Black Jews from Ethiopia? Why don't you ever do a campaign for the Jews from the Middle East and North Africa to retrieve justice? What about my land that was stolen from me? What about my community that was killed and ethnically cleansed? 850,000 people from Arab and Muslim countries in Iran. You visited on
does that make it okay to deny citizenship to Arabs? to Palestinians?
Yeah, look, every activist has the right to pick an issue and stick to that issue. It's impossible to focus on every issue. I do understand if you see somebody maybe who's non-Jewish, it is a red flag. You question, why are you focused only on Israel and not other issues? I do understand that sentiment, but we need to give Ariel the benefit of the doubt that being a Jew and having the fact that the Jewish state seems to be at the expense of the equality to the Palestinians, that she has every right to focus on this issue more than other issues.
So I don't know what her connection is to this land.
Well, she says she feels a connection to this land, and she feels connected to the Jewish people, but also Ariel's main objection is that she doesn't see a way how we could have a Jewish state on this land that would be democratic, and that concerns her. And I think that's a legitimate concern. And Hen, I think that's a concern of yours as well. Again, your solution is a two-state solution. Ariel doesn't see that as viable. Do you see the two-state solution as viable? Can you make a case that we could still make that work?
Who are you asking, me or
yeah, Hen, you? Yeah. Because Ariel, it seems like Ariel can get behind a Jewish state as long as it's not at the expense of equality for Palestinians. So she
kind of then isn't a Jewish state, but again,
well,
in fantasy
there's all sorts of solutions where we could have a Jewish state, equality for Palestinians. Again, Hen, sorry?
I said that's not anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism is opposing any type of Jewish state.
I don't think you're the definer of anti-Zionism, first of all. And second of all, I don't support any state anywhere that privileges one group of people over another. And I do not support a state that grants special privileges or rights to Jews. And I have a severe problem with that. That said, I would be fine with a two-state solution if that hadn't been destroyed. But there is still the problem over time. As we live in this global world, in a world of refugees, because we have refugee problems in so many places, that the idea of having to maintain a demographic majority is counter to the ideas of democracy, and is counter to the principle of equality that we must pursue. So I am for Jewish safety, and I am for Jewish people living together, and I am for the rights of all people that live in that land today. And I think that when we look at that land today, we have an obligation to pay special attention and to advocate for those who are right now at this moment without their rights.
Consider this camelback broken. I think that anti-Zionists, I'll just finish with that, anti-Zionists are supposed to be the ones that care about Jewish safety in the diaspora the most. They should be the ones that making sure that no anti-Semitism is going unchecked, that anti-Semitism is being deterred from every society. But in what we're seeing with Ariel and others anti-Zionists like her, they are the ones that constantly apologize for anti-Semitism. They are the ones that are contributing to the feeling of unsafe that many Jews have in America and around the world. Every time they complain, every time Jews are speaking out about anti-Semitism, what we're seeing from anti-Zionists is that they're silencing them. They're supporting Ilhan Omar, they're supporting AOC, they're making sure that even KKK and Nazis are supporting them and encouraging what they're saying. And I think that's the point here. The point is that they don't want Jews to be safe anywhere. They don't want Jews to be safe in Israel. They don't want a Jewish state to exist. And in the same time that they're saying that Israel shouldn't exist and there shouldn't be a Jewish state, they're advocating and making it even more difficult and more unsafe for Jews in the diaspora to live and emboldening Semitic act. So I think that's my final thought.
Ariel, I'd like to give you a final thought, but I want to ask you, can you understand why Hen and many others are bothered by the fact that you speak often about a Palestinian struggle, but it seems like you often forget to talk about the Jewish struggle and Jewish right to self-determination? Can you understand why that is hard for many Jews
It's actually not true. If you follow my Twitter closely, I tweet excessively about rising anti-Semitism here in the U.S. I'm extremely concerned and working as hard as I can around the clock, including last night at the vice presidential debates when Mike Pence said that Donald Trump can't be an anti-Semite because he has Jewish grandchildren. This is an ongoing and constant major problem that we have here in the United States, and rising anti-Semitism across the world is a major problem and a major part of my personal life's work, because absolutely it is not just dangerous to Jews, but it's dangerous to all people. And it's personal for me and important for all people. And in terms of final thoughts, I would just reiterate that what we're looking for here, what we need as Jews, is to pursue equality and freedom and justice for all people, for ourselves and for Palestinians who have been living under endless occupation, under a system of apartheid that is long past due to end. And that when that apartheid system ends, when equal rights are achieved, and I think they will be achieved, in the land of Israel, Palestine, then it will be better for us also as Jews.
If you only speak about anti-Semitism when it politically suits you, you're not talking about anti-Semitism. That's the point. And I called out anti-Semitism from both the far right and the far left, and the right and the left. And often I agree with you calling out anti-Semitism on the right, but I've never seen you calling out anti-Semitism when anti-Zionists are doing it. And I think that's a big blind spot that you have. And other than that, again, the point about refugees, Jews of color, that I don't see much caring for them. And I think that anti-Zionism, as I said in the beginning, is a very privileged ideology that because you have other citizenship and you have other nationality and you live in on a stolen land of a burial site of Native Americans shamelessly, I think that's why you don't need Israel. But Israel is not there for American Jews only. It's there for Jews from Iran, Jews from Ethiopia, Jews from North Africa, Jews from the Middle East, my family that is safe from Iraq and North Africa. And when you say that you don't think Israel has the right to exist, you're basically saying that you don't think my family has the right to live. And that's a death threat to me. And I'm sorry I'm saying it this way, but this is what it is. It's clear and simple for me. Without Israel, I wouldn't be alive today. I would be probably either killed for being a queer Jew of color anywhere in the Middle East, or being oppressed as a second-class citizen in Iraq or Tunisia. I think that there's a reason that this ideology is shared by only a few Jews, a handful of Jews in America, a handful of Jews around the world, and the KKK and neo-Nazis.
Great. So this conversation is not quite over. We are just going to move it to the after party in Discord. There's a link in the description. I actually think that this was very productive. There still are fundamental differences, but I think we're a little bit closer, and I would love to have you both on for round two. I think there's still a lot more to discuss. For those who haven't yet, if you like this content, please subscribe. If you like this video, give it an upvote. If you don't, give it a downvote. Just express yourself. For the few of you who were upset that you think I spoke too much, well, then you must be new to this channel. I speak. That's part of the show. Okay? Get used to it. But it's great to have you all here.
Thanks.
Also, if you really like this content, we have a Patreon that gives – a Patreon is a platform where you can support content creators. You get some special benefits if you support the Great Debate on Patreon. You could – donate Bitcoin. We like Bitcoin. There's all that in the description. We love you all. Oh, and for those who don't understand, Discord is a chat where you could connect to your voice. So Hen and Ariel will continue this conversation, and everyone else can join in on the conversation, either with text or voice, video or not. It's up to you. It's an awesome platform. And that's it. With love from Tel Aviv, Israel.
Thanks so much for having us. And Ariel, whenever you feel like going back home, we will be here to make sure you're safe.
You forget that I'm banned from your democratic country that's a safe haven for all Jews.
Yeah, I remember that. And once you decide to stop being against this country, we will be.
Which I think important, my ban. Oh, so it's a safe haven for all Jews who don't dissent.
Except one.
Quite the democracy.
Yeah.
Quite the democracy.
Except neo-Nazi KKK, yes.
We'll get you back here, Ariel. We'll work on it.
All right.
I appreciate that.
Okay, signing off. See you all in the Discord.